The annual submission. Ambassador Zerlax adjusted his environmental suit's humidification settings as he waited at the grand entrance of the Galactic Agricultural Exhibition. The massive crystal dome of New Eden Station loomed above, its transparent panels filtering the harsh light of the binary star system into a gentle golden glow. As chief coordinator for the Millennial event, he had overseen hundreds of species submissions, but something about the approaching human delegation made his secondary hearts flutter with unease. Temporal marker indicates human arrival in 15 standard units. His assistant, a crystalline being named Vix, chimed. Their vessel appears. Unconventional. Zerlax extended his optical stalks to their full length, focusing on the approaching ship. Unlike the sleek, standardized transport vessels used by other delegations, the human ship was a patchwork of different materials and designs. Its hull bore the marks of countless repairs and modifications, yet it moved with surprising grace. How many representatives did they send? Zerlax asked, noting the ship's unusual size. Manifest indicates. Vix paused, their crystalline structure flickering with confusion. 523 individuals. That can't be right. Zerlax's dermis shifted to a pale yellow of concern. The standard delegation size is 5 to 10 representatives per species. The human ship's docking procedure was as unorthodox as its appearance. Instead of using the automated systems, they manually guided their vessel into place with a precision that seemed impossible for such a large craft. The moment the airlock sealed, chaos erupted. Humans began pouring out of the ship in waves, each carrying what appeared to be different plant specimens. Their excitement was palpable, filling the usually sterile arrival chamber with a cacophony of voices and laughter. Zerlax watched in mounting horror as they wheeled out cart after cart of growing chambers, each containing what seemed to be entirely different species of plants. Greetings. A human with silver-streaked hair stepped forward, her dark skin contrasting with the pristine white of her environmental suit. Dr. Sarah Chen, lead botanist for the Earth Collective. We're absolutely thrilled to be here. Zerlax tried to maintain his diplomatic composure. Dr. Chen, while we welcome Earth's participation, I must remind you that the exhibition guidelines clearly state 1 plant species per participating civilization. You appear to have brought. He gestured helplessly at the overwhelming variety of vegetation behind her. Dr. Chen's smile widened. Oh, we're well aware of the guidelines. We've brought exactly 1 species, Brassica oleracea. Perhaps you'd like to scan them. With trembling appendages, Zerlax produced his molecular analyzer. The first scan was of a large purple-headed plant. The second, a tight cluster of green florets. The third, a mass of wrinkled leaves. To his astonishment, each scan returned the same basic genetic signature. Impossible, he whispered, his dermis now cycling through a rainbow of confused colors. Not impossible, Dr. Chen corrected gently. Just human. What you're seeing is the result of roughly 10,000 years of selective breeding. Cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, all the same species, just expressed differently. We thought, since the rules specified 1 species, we'd bring examples of everything we've done with ours. Vix's crystalline form was vibrating with increasing frequency, their species equivalent of anxiety. The exhibition hall's environmental systems weren't designed to handle this much variety. Oh, don't worry about that. Another human chimed in, wheeling forward what looked like a modified atmospheric processor. We brought our own systems. Wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone. As Zerlax watched the humans efficiently setting up their elaborate display, he realized this exhibition was about to become far more interesting than anyone had anticipated. The other species had brought their most advanced agricultural achievements, single plants optimized for specific purposes. The humans, in their characteristically overwhelming way, had brought what amounted to a practical demonstration of their entire agricultural history. Dr. Chen, he found himself asking, why bring so many variants? Surely 1 or 2 examples would have sufficed. She turned to him, her eyes twinkling with an emotion his translator couldn't quite interpret. Ambassador, in our experience, the best way to understand something is to see all of its possibilities. We're not just showing you a plant. We're showing you potential itself. As the humans continued their setup, Zerlax sent an urgent message to the exhibition's governing council. They would need to completely reorganize the presentation schedule and possibly reinforce several load-bearing walls. Humanity's first participation in the Galactic Agricultural Exhibition was already proving to be exactly as disruptive as he had feared, and they hadn't even started their actual presentation yet. A single seed. The exhibition hall had never seen such activity. As other species delegations arrived with their carefully cultivated single specimens, the human sprawling display area became an impromptu gathering point. Dr. Chen and her team worked tirelessly, setting up specialized growing chambers that demonstrated the full spectrum of their agricultural achievement. Senior botanist Clarix of the Centaurian Science Academy couldn't contain his fascination. His tentacles waved in complex patterns of scientific excitement as he examined a particular specimen labeled Romanesco broccoli. "The mathematical precision is extraordinary," he commented, his translator struggling to convey his wonder. "The recursive spiral patterns, the fractalization of the florets, all from the same base genetics as that purple specimen." "Cabbage." Dr. Chen nodded, adjusting the humidity controls. "Same species, different expression. We humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Each variant was developed to meet specific needs, some for cold climates, others for hot, some for longer growing seasons, others for shorter." The exhibition's lead geneticist, a towering insectoid named Zixta, chittered in disbelief as she reviewed the molecular scans. But the degree of variation while maintaining viable reproduction, it should be impossible without advanced genetic engineering facilities. A younger human scientist, Dr. Marcus Wong, looked up from where he was calibrating a soil composition analyzer. No labs needed, just patience, observation, and about 10,000 years of farmers selecting the best plants for their needs. "We call it artificial selection, working with nature's own mechanisms for change." The growing crowd of alien scientists and agricultural experts buzzed with discussion. Their own species' approaches to agriculture had focused on optimization, creating the perfect single variant for specific conditions. The human approach of embracing and encouraging diversity within a single species was completely foreign to them. Dr. Chen's team continued their setup, seemingly oblivious to the stir they were causing. They installed specialized lighting systems that mimic different planetary conditions, soil beds with varying mineral compositions, and atmospheric regulators that could simulate everything from Arctic chill to tropical humidity. "But why maintain so many variants?" asked a crystalline being whose name translated roughly to morning dew. "Surely some must be superior to others." Dr. Wong smiled, a gesture that still puzzled many of the alien observers. "Superior for what purpose? A cabbage that thrives in cold might wither in heat. Brussels sprouts can handle frost that would kill cauliflower. Each variant is a solution to a different problem." Ambassador Zerlax, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, felt his dermis shift to the deep blue of revelation. "You're not just showing us plants," he said slowly. "You're showing us adaptation itself." "Exactly." Dr. Chen beamed. "Every planet, every climate, every soil type presents unique challenges. Instead of forcing environments to conform to our crops, we learn to help our crops adapt to different environments." A murmur rippled through the gathered aliens as the implications sank in. Many of their worlds faced agricultural challenges. Some were too cold, others too hot. Some had soil chemistry that made traditional farming nearly impossible. The human approach offered a new perspective. Instead of seeing these conditions as obstacles to overcome, they could be opportunities for adaptation. The exhibition's governing council, watching through remote feeds, was in an uproar. The humans hadn't just brought a plant. They'd brought a completely different paradigm of agricultural development. Some council members argued this violated the spirit of the exhibition. Others insisted it was exactly what the exhibition was meant to showcase: innovations in agricultural science. As the debate raged on, Dr. Chen's team finished setting up their final display, a timeline showing the evolution of their Brassica varieties. It started with ancient wild mustard plants and branched out into dozens of cultivars, each adapted to different conditions and needs. The really exciting part, Dr. Chen announced to the now massive crowd, is that we're not done. Every new world, every new challenge is an opportunity to develop new variants. We're already working on versions that could thrive on Mars, on Europa, even in the methane seas of Titan. Ambassador Zerlax, watching the excitement build among the gathered scientists, realized that the exhibition would never be quite the same after this. The humans hadn't just brought a plant. They'd brought a revolution in agricultural thinking, all neatly packaged in the variants of a single species. As the first day of setup drew to a close, he overheard two junior scientists from different species discussing the implications. "Do you think," one asked, "we could apply this approach to our own crops?" "Why not?" the other replied. "The humans did it with stone tools and careful observation. Imagine what we could do with modern technology and their methods combined." Zerlax felt his dermis shift to the gentle green of optimism. Perhaps the humans' disruptive arrival wasn't just chaos. It was the seed of something new, something that could change agriculture across the galaxy. The exhibition hadn't even officially begun, and already it was promising to be the most significant in its 1,000-year history. Growing pains. The official opening of the exhibition brought chaos of a different kind. The human display had been cordoned off with shimmer barriers to manage the overwhelming crowd of observers, but that didn't stop the constant stream of questions and exclamations of disbelief. Dr. Chen and her team had organized their presentation into growth stages, demonstrating how each variant developed from seed to maturity. The real-time growth chambers, accelerated by carefully calibrated temporal fields, showed the transformations happening before the observer's eyes. "Watch this," Dr. Wang said, adjusting the environmental controls on one chamber. Inside, a young Brassica plant began responding to changing conditions. As the temperature dropped and light levels decreased, the plant's growth pattern shifted, leaves thickening and curling inward to form what would become a cabbage head. A meridian scientist, their bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with excitement, raised a question that had been troubling many. But surely this level of adaptability makes the species dangerous. Could it not overwhelm native ecosystems? "An excellent question," Dr. Chen responded, pulling up a holographic display of genetic markers. Each variant is carefully engineered to be sterile outside of controlled conditions. We learned that lesson early in our agricultural history. These plants can't reproduce without specific human intervention. The revelation caused another stir among the gathered scientists. The humans had managed to create incredible diversity while maintaining strict control over reproduction, a feat that many species had attempted and failed to achieve with their own crops. Ambassador Zerlax, who had been monitoring the proceedings with growing concern, noticed a peculiar pattern. The species most resistant to human agricultural methods were those with the most rigid social structures. The hegemony representatives, in particular, seemed deeply disturbed by the implications. "This is not agriculture," declared High Commissioner Vector of the hegemony, his crystalline form vibrating with disapproval. "This is chaos masquerading as science. A single species should have a single purpose, a single form. This abundance of forms violates natural order." Dr. Sarah Chen's response was diplomatic but firm. "With respect, Commissioner, nature itself disagrees. On Earth, many species show remarkable variation in response to environmental pressures. We didn't invent this adaptability. We simply learned to work with it." The debate might have escalated further if not for an unexpected interruption. A junior scientist from the Argonian Collective, a species known for their conservative approach to biotechnology, had made a discovery that silenced the entire hall. These growth patterns, they announced, their translator barely keeping up with their excited clicks and whistles. They matched the sacred forms. The mathematical progressions we've been trying to achieve in our crops for centuries, they're naturally occurring in these human variants. The Argonian pulled up their own data, overlaying it with the growth patterns of the Romanesco broccoli. The correlation was undeniable. What the Argonians had been trying to engineer through complex genetic manipulation, humans had achieved through simple selective breeding. The implications rippled through the exhibition like a shockwave. Species that had spent generations trying to perfect their crops through high-tech solutions were faced with evidence that a supposedly primitive approach might have been more effective all along. Dr. Wong took advantage of the moment to demonstrate another aspect of their display. "We've also brought examples of failed experiments," he said, gesturing to a sealed chamber containing plants that showed various defects. "We believe it's just as important to understand what doesn't work as what does." This transparency was shocking to many of the gathered species. Failure was typically hidden away, not displayed alongside successes, but the humans argued that understanding failure was crucial to their agricultural development. As the day progressed, the exhibition's governing council found themselves dealing with an unprecedented situation. Several species had already formally requested permission to withdraw their entries, wanting to revise their presentations in light of what they'd learned from the human display. Ambassador Zerlax watched as Dr. Chen patiently explained basic concepts of selective breeding to a group of young scientists from various species. Their enthusiasm was infectious, but he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The humans hadn't just brought plants to this exhibition. They'd brought ideas that threatened to upend thousands of years of established agricultural practice across the galaxy. "Your species," he said quietly to Dr. Chen when she finally had a moment free. "You never do anything simply, do you?" She laughed, a sound that still startled many of the alien observers. "We've learned that nature itself isn't simple, Ambassador. The universe is complex, interconnected, full of possibilities. We just try to work with that complexity rather than against it." As the first official day of the exhibition drew to a close, messages were already being sent across the galaxy. The human approach to agriculture wasn't just a scientific curiosity. It was a potential solution to food security issues that had plagued many worlds for generations. But with that potential came questions that would need to be addressed. Questions of ecological safety, genetic sovereignty, and the very nature of agricultural progress itself. The root of change. By the third day of the exhibition, political representatives had begun arriving alongside the scientists. The human display had become more than an agricultural presentation. It was now the center of a growing galactic debate about food security and technological advancement. Dr. Chen found herself in an impromptu meeting with the Galactic Agricultural Council, trying to explain concepts that humans had taken for granted for millennia. The council chamber's adaptive lighting shifted nervously as she spoke, reflecting the tension in the room. "You have to understand," she explained, gesturing to a holographic display of Earth's climate zones. "Our planet has extreme variation in growing conditions. We didn't develop this agricultural diversity for fun. We did it because we had to survive." The council's senior administrator, a being composed primarily of organized plasma contained within a sophisticated environmental suit, pulsed with concern. But the implications for existing agricultural systems, the economic disruption alone could destabilize entire sectors. "Or it could save them," interrupted Dr. Wong, who had been quietly analyzing data in the corner. He projected a new set of statistics into the chamber's holographic display. "We've analyzed the crop failure rates across the galaxy. 73% of agricultural disasters in the past century were due to environmental changes that made specialized monocrops non-viable." The data hung in the air like an accusation. Many of the council members shifted uncomfortably. Their species had long advocated for the standardization of agricultural practices across colonized worlds. The human approach threatened to upend generations of established policy. Meanwhile, in the exhibition hall, something unexpected was happening. Junior scientists from various species have begun forming informal working groups, sharing data and discussing potential applications of human agricultural principles to their own world's crops. Ambassador Zerlax found Dr. Sarah Chen observing these spontaneous collaborations with evident satisfaction. "You planned this, didn't you?" he asked, his dermis shifting to the mottled pattern that indicated amused suspicion. "Planned? No," she replied, watching as a group of scientists excitedly discussed the possibility of applying selective breeding principles to Centaurian crystal fungi. "Hoped for it. Absolutely. The real breakthrough isn't in our plants. It's in showing that there's another way to approach agriculture entirely." The exhibition's security systems were struggling to keep up with the constant flow of data as species across the galaxy requested access to Earth's agricultural history. The humans had included their entire agricultural database with their submission, complete with detailed records of successes and failures going back centuries. "It's not just about the plants anymore," Dr. Wong explained to a gathering of agricultural ministers. "It's about the methodology, the philosophy. We're not just showing you what we did, we're showing you how you can do it yourselves." This was perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of the human presentation. While other species guarded their agricultural innovations jealously, the humans were openly sharing their techniques, encouraging others to adapt and improve upon them. Not everyone was pleased with these developments. The hegemony delegation had filed formal protests, claiming that the human approach threatened to destabilize carefully balanced agricultural markets. The Mercantile Consortium worried about the economic implications of widely available adaptive crop varieties. But their protests were drowned out by the growing excitement among the scientific community. The possibility of developing crops that could adapt to changing conditions rather than requiring environments to be adapted to crops was too promising to ignore. Late that evening, as the exhibition's artificial day cycle dimmed to night, Ambassador Zerlax found himself in a quiet conversation with Dr. Chen in the observation dome. Below them, the exhibition hall hummed with continued activity despite the late hour. "I must admit," he said, watching scientists from a dozen species crowded around a display showing the development of kale from wild mustard. "When I first saw your delegation arrive, I thought it would be a disaster." Dr. Chen smiled. "It still might be. Change is never easy, especially on a galactic scale. But look at them down there. They're not just learning about our plants, they're learning to think differently about possibility itself. And that's what truly frightens some of us," Zerlax admitted. "Your species doesn't just bring change. You make others want to change too." "Is that so terrible?" she asked, gesturing to the excited groups below. "Look at them. They're not just copying our methods, they're already thinking of ways to improve them, adapt them to their own worlds and needs. That's exactly what we hoped would happen." As if to emphasize her point, a cheer erupted from one of the working groups. They had successfully mapped potential adaptation pathways for a meridian floating grain, using principles derived from Earth's agricultural history. The implications were clear. The exhibition had become more than a showcase of agricultural achievements. It was becoming the birthplace of a new approach to galactic agriculture, one that embraced adaptation and diversity, rather than standardization and control. As news of the developments spread across the galaxy, more and more species began to recognize that the humans hadn't just brought plants to the exhibition. They'd brought hope. Hope for worlds struggling with changing climates, hope for species facing food security challenges, hope for a future where agriculture could adapt to challenges rather than being overwhelmed by them. Harvest season. The final day of the exhibition arrived with an atmosphere of barely contained excitement. The demonstration halls were packed with delegates from across the galaxy, but the crowd's attention wasn't focused on the official judging. Instead, all eyes were on the remarkable transformations taking place in the collaborative research pods that had sprung up around the human display. The Argonian scientists had made a breakthrough. Using principles learned from studying the Brassica variations, they had managed to induce controlled adaptability in their crystal-based food crops. Their success had triggered a cascade of similar achievements across other species research teams. "It's like watching a garden bloom after the first rain," Dr. Wong remarked to Ambassador Zerlax as they observed the proceedings. "Each species is taking our basic principles and applying them in ways we never imagined." The exhibition's governing council had been forced to extend the event's duration to accommodate the unprecedented level of scientific collaboration. Dr. Chen's team found themselves acting less as presenters and more as advisors, helping various species understand the fundamentals of selective breeding and adaptive agriculture. "The most remarkable thing," Dr. Chen told a gathering of agricultural ministers, "isn't just that these techniques work across different forms of life. It's that each species is improving upon our methods, adapting them to their own unique biology and needs." The Meridians had discovered that their floating grain could be selectively bred for different atmospheric pressures, potentially allowing colonization of worlds previously deemed uninhabitable. The crystalline beings had found ways to incorporate principles of fractal growth from Romanesco broccoli into their mineral-based food production. Even the hegemony, despite their initial resistance, had begun quietly implementing human agricultural principles in their frontier colonies. Their official stance remained opposed to chaotic human methods, but the results were becoming impossible to ignore. Ambassador Zerlax found himself in the unexpected position of mediating between traditional agricultural authorities and the growing movement for adaptive farming. His dermis had settled into a permanent state of swirling patterns, reflecting the complexity of the situation. "We're witnessing more than an agricultural revolution," he announced to the closing session of the exhibition. "We're seeing the emergence of a new way of thinking about how species can adapt and thrive in our galaxy." As the final presentations concluded, Dr. Chen's team prepared for departure. Their display cases were mostly empty now. Many of their specimens had been distributed to various research teams for further study, but they had left something far more valuable: knowledge, freely shared and eagerly absorbed. "There will be challenges ahead," Dr. Wong acknowledged during the closing ceremony. "Adapting these methods to different forms of life, ensuring ecological safety, managing the economic transitions. None of it will be easy, but we've seen here that the galaxy's species can work together to solve these problems." The exhibition's official records would show that the human delegation's Brassica Oldracia variants won several technical awards for genetic diversity and adaptive potential. But the real victory was evident in the hundreds of research collaborations that had formed, the thousands of data exchanges initiated, and the millions of messages being sent across the galaxy carrying new ideas about agricultural possibility. As the human delegation prepared to board their ship, Ambassador Zerlax approached Dr. Chen one final time. "Your species," he said, his dermis showing the deep blue of profound realization. "You didn't just bring us plants that can adapt. You showed us that we can adapt too." Dr. Chen smiled, looking back at the exhibition hall where scientists from dozens of species were still working together, sharing ideas and planning future collaborations. "That's the real secret of human agriculture, Ambassador. We never just grew plants, we grew possibilities." The human ship departed much as it had arrived, unconventionally and with a certain chaotic energy. But it left behind a galaxy forever changed. In the cycles that followed, new agricultural methods spread across the stars, adapting and evolving just like the plants they helped cultivate. The Galactic Agricultural Exhibition would never be the same. Future events would focus not just on individual achievements, but on collaborative innovations. Species that had once jealously guarded their agricultural secrets now openly shared their discoveries, understanding that diversity and adaptation were the keys to survival. And on countless worlds, in fields and farms, and growing chambers of every description, new varieties of plants began to flourish. Each one a testament to the day humanity showed the galaxy that the greatest growth comes not from controlling nature, but from learning to grow along with it. In the years that followed, historians would mark the exhibition as a turning point in galactic agriculture. But for those who had been there, who had witnessed the moment when humanity's garden of possibilities first bloomed among the stars, It was something even more significant. Proof that the greatest harvests come from seeds of change planted in fields of cooperation. Ambassador Zerlax's final report to the Galactic Council contained a single line that summed up the entire event. The humans brought us one plant species, but they showed us infinite possibilities. His dermis, as he wrote those words, showed the clear, steady green of hope for the future.